Have you ever seen a mother publicly brag about being a saint while hiding a horrific secret? No. So imagine this. You are scrolling through Facebook and see a glowing tribute from your parents. They are bragging to hundreds of relatives about the warm, loving, perfect home they provided for you and your sister in Buffalo, New York. But they conveniently left out that while your sister slept in a luxury suite upstairs, you were relegated to a damp, freezing basement for your entire childhood. I didn't argue or write a long, emotional comment. Instead, I just smiled, clicked reply, and attached a high-resolution screenshot. It was a picture of a county health department report detailing the toxic black mold and freezing temperatures of my childhood bedroom, with one caption. My childhood versus hers. Welcome back to my channel. Before I show you the family meltdown, drop a comment with your age and hit subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. My name is Isabella Evangeline. I am 32 years old, and I work as a municipal compliance auditor. My daily routine involves walking through municipal buildings to measure ambient temperatures, test for airborne hazards, and cite code violations. I track systemic neglect for a living. I am very thorough because I learned early what happens when people look the other way. At 10 years old, my parents, Richard and Susan, moved my belongings down 2 flights of wooden stairs. They set up a twin bed next to the water heater. The concrete walls wept moisture from October to April. You could see your breath in the air before breakfast. Upstairs, my younger sister Chloe enjoyed a renovated bedroom with a bay window and dedicated baseboard heating. My parents did not call this punishment. They framed it as an accommodation. Susan told our relatives that I was highly sensitive to household noise and needed my own quiet retreat. Richard told his friends at the hardware store that they were fostering my independence. They wrapped their neglect in the language of modern parenting, and everyone applauded them for it. I spent 7 winters wearing a wool hat to sleep. I would lie awake listening to the furnace rumble to life, sending a rush of hot air up through the vents to Chloe's room, while I stuffed old newspapers under my thin mattress just to stop the freezing dampness of the concrete from seeping into my spine. The silence between my family and me had been brittle for years, held together only by polite text messages on holidays. That fragile arrangement shattered a month before Chloe's wedding. Susan had taken to social media to orchestrate the narrative. I was sitting in my apartment, drinking coffee and reviewing a zoning file, when my feed refreshed. It was a sprawling, multi-paragraph post from Susan. She included an album of glossy engagement photos and a lengthy caption reflecting on her journey as a mother. She wrote about the safe, nurturing sanctuary she and Richard built in Buffalo. She thanked her community for helping her raise 2 girls in a house filled with nothing but warmth and unconditional support. 34 people had already commented. Aunts, uncles, and neighbors praised her maternal grace. They called her an inspiration. I made a mistake right then. It is a common mistake for people who have spent their lives adapting to unreasonable people. I thought I could appeal to her conscience privately. I pulled out my phone and sent Susan a text message. I kept it brief. Mom, please tone down the perfect childhood narrative. It is really hard to read considering where I slept. I set the phone down and waited. I expected a defensive excuse, or perhaps a dismissive remark about my memory. I did not expect a calculated ambush. 20 minutes later, my phone vibrated with an alert from a family group thread I rarely participated in. Susan had taken a screenshot of my private text and posted it to 20 extended relatives. Her accompanying message was swift and surgical. She wrote, "Please pray for Isabella. Her jealousy over Chloe's wedding is making her bitter, and she is lashing out with these delusions. We love her, but we will not let her ruin her sister's special season." Before I could type a response, Chloe chimed in. She told the group it was exhausting having a sister who constantly played the victim. 2 aunts added heart emojis in support of Susan. I sat at my kitchen table and watched my private plea for basic honesty get twisted into proof of my instability. The trap was executed flawlessly. By asking for a quiet resolution, I had handed my mother the exact ammunition she needed to preemptively discredit me. I felt the heat rise in my neck, the familiar urge to type a long defense, to beg them to remember the space heater that sparked out in January, the cough I could not shake for 3 years. I closed the messaging app. Arguing with people who author their own reality is a waste of energy. I took a deep breath, letting the sting of the betrayal settle into something colder and far more useful. I opened my work laptop. I moved my cursor past my current municipal audits and clicked on a folder I had saved to my desktop 3 weeks ago. The folder contained documents I had acquired through a formal records request. I stared at the main file, noting the county seal visible on the first page, and decided that trying to protect my family's feelings was a habit I was finally ready to break. The health department record, currently illuminating my computer screen, did not materialize by magic. Finding it required a deliberate and exhausting campaign. The process began 6 months prior, when Richard and Susan formally listed the Buffalo property for sale. They asked $400,000 for the house. I saw the listing photos online and noticed the basement immediately. Fresh paint covered the concrete walls. New carpeting hid the uneven floor. They were staging a cover-up to secure their retirement fund. Seeing that fresh paint triggered a visceral memory from a Tuesday in November 2004. I was 10 years old and coughing until my ribs ached. I carried the metallic taste of a lingering chest infection for months. A school nurse named Mrs. Gable finally noticed the sound. The nurse also noticed the damp smell of wet earth clinging to my clothes. Mrs. Gable made a phone call, and the county health department dispatched an environmental inspector to the house. Richard and Susan performed their usual magic that afternoon. They smiled warmly at the inspector. Susan poured fresh coffee and offered baked goods. They claimed the basement was just a storage room, and my bed was merely a temporary fort I insisted on playing in. They lied smoothly to keep Child Protective Services away. It worked. The county eventually closed the inquiry without removing me, but the inspector still filed an initial environmental assessment. That assessment became a permanent public record. I knew the file existed, but extracting it from the municipal archives proved difficult. When the county clerk denied my initial application citing privacy regulations, I didn't just accept it and move on. I filed a formal Freedom of Information request and diverted a significant portion of my savings to hire an administrative attorney to force the records open. I bypassed the bureaucratic stonewalling entirely. I treated my own childhood trauma like a corporate audit. This relentless pursuit carried a steep personal cost. David is my fiancé. He manages supply chains for a regional distributor. He is a pragmatic man who builds his life around looking forward. He loves me deeply, but he did not understand my need to excavate a 15-year-old wound. He would wake up at 2 in the morning to find me illuminated by the harsh blue light of my monitor, aggressively scrolling through municipal zoning codes instead of looking at bridal magazines. He would sit at the kitchen island, staring blankly at the mounting stack of legal invoices draining our joint wedding fund, and rub his temples in pure exhaustion. David begged me to let the past die. He said I was letting Richard and Susan's rot spread into our own home. One evening in October, the tension finally broke. David stood across the kitchen island and asked me to drop the lawsuit. He said my vendetta was turning me into someone he hardly recognized. I tried to explain that I needed the physical paper to prove I was not losing my mind. I needed the county seal to validate my reality. David could not bridge the gap between his desire for peace and my need for justice. He packed a canvas duffel bag that same night. He moved into his brother's guest room for 3 weeks. Those 3 weeks were the quietest and heaviest period of my adult life. I slept in a hollow apartment. I drank coffee in silence. I paid the ultimate emotional price for refusing to let my parents rewrite history. David eventually returned after realizing he could not bear to lose me, but the fracture in our relationship remained fragile. We were actively learning how to rebuild our trust. David still viewed the basement record as a dangerous obsession, and I knew I was risking my future to expose my past. The sacrifice ultimately produced results. A month after David unpacked his bags, a thick envelope arrived in the mail from my attorney. Inside was the unsealed 2004 environmental health assessment. The language in the report was devoid of emotion. It was clinical, factual, and devastating. The inspector noted active toxic black mold colonies spreading across the drywall directly behind the water heater. The structural notes indicated a failing foundation that allowed ground moisture to seep freely into the enclosed space. The most validating detail was a simple temperature reading taken near my childhood twin bed. 45 degrees Fahrenheit. The inspector wrote a specific and damning conclusion at the bottom of the page. The ambient conditions are uninhabitable for a minor. Susan and Richard were not merely strict parents administering tough love. They were legally negligent guardians. They had masked their cruelty behind a facade of respectable middle-class parenting, while I inhaled toxic spores and shivered under heavy wool blankets through the night. Now, sitting at my desk, I view the scanned document on my monitor. On my phone, the family group thread continues to buzz with fresh insults. Chloe is typing frantic messages about loyalty and wedding season stress. Susan is basking in the glow of her curated social media tribute. The Facebook comments keep multiplying. Extended relatives are typing long paragraphs of praise. They call Susan a role model. They celebrate the beautiful home in Buffalo. I feel a profound shift in my body. The lingering sting of my mother's recent betrayal evaporates. The emotional hurt is replaced by a cold, forensic precision. I am no longer a wounded daughter seeking validation from people incapable of giving it. I am a municipal auditor reviewing a fraudulent ledger. I open a new browser tab and navigate to the real estate listing for the Buffalo property. The status changed 2 days ago. It reads pending sale. Richard and Susan have secured a buyer. They are currently navigating the escrow process, eagerly anticipating a lucrative payout that will fund their comfortable retirement. In the state of New York, sellers are legally required to provide a property condition disclosure statement to any potential buyer. Concealing a documented history of toxic mold and structural foundation damage constitutes severe real estate fraud. Susan and Richard likely slapped a layer of cheap primer over the concrete walls and checked the box claiming the house was pristine. I know exactly what my next move will accomplish. I am not simply seeking revenge or trying to disrupt a bridal shower narrative. I am setting an unavoidable legal trap. By attaching this official county health report to a highly visible public forum, I will shatter their protective bubble. Real estate agents, local neighbors, and community members will see the document. The information will inevitably reach the buyers currently under contract. I draft my response in the comment section of my mother's glowing tribute. I keep my fingers steady on the keyboard. I do not type insults. I do not defend my character against the attacks from Chloe. I rely entirely on the weight of the county seal and the inspector's stark measurements. Hitting the enter key will obligate my parents to confront the structural decay they tried to paint over. It will freeze their financial escape route and bind them to the rotting foundation they forced me to endure. I take one final breath, verify the attached screenshot, and prepare to introduce my family to the consequences of their own actions. I position my cursor over the reply button beneath my mother's sprawling tribute. I do not type a paragraph. I refuse to match Susan's emotional performance with one of my own. I simply type 4 words. My childhood versus hers. I attach the screenshot bearing the county health department seal. I press enter. The digital silence that follows is distinct. It carries the weight of a held breath. For 20 minutes, the notification badge on my screen remains dark. I walk to my kitchen, pour a glass of water, and watch the condensation gather on the glass. I know exactly what is happening in Buffalo. People are reading the inspector's notes. Aunts and cousins are zooming in on the 45-degree temperature reading. They are digesting the phrase uninhabitable for a minor. The curated narrative of a perfect upbringing is colliding with the municipal record of a toxic environment. Then the family group thread fractures. My phone vibrates across the granite countertop. It buzzes in a continuous, frantic rhythm. Dozens of messages flood the screen within seconds. I do not open the text thread. I wait for the inevitable phone call. Susan dials first. I accept the call and put it on speaker. I do not say hello. Isabella, take that down right now. Susan's voice is breathy and high. She sounds out of breath, as though she has been sprinting. What is wrong with you? Why are you doing this to your sister? I am correcting a public record, I say. My voice remains level. You are lying. Susan insists, her volume rising. We gave you that basement because you begged for privacy. You hated the noise upstairs. You pushed us away. We tried to bring you up to the guest room, and you refused. We accommodated your moods. I listened to the revisionist history. I realize in this moment that Susan is not merely lying to save face. Susan genuinely believes her own fabrication. To survive her own reflection, Susan has spent 15 years convincing herself that freezing a 10-year-old child was an act of maternal grace. She has built an entire psychological defense mechanism around her own negligence. The inspector measured the temperature at 45 degrees, Mom. I reply, consulting the document on my screen. He documented active fungal growth behind my headboard. You did not accommodate me. You endangered me. There is a brief scuffling sound on the other end of the line. The phone changes hands. Richard's voice replaces Susan's. He does not yell. He speaks in tight, clipped syllables driven entirely by self-preservation. Listen to me very carefully, Richard says. You are treading on dangerous ground. Posting fabricated government documents is a crime. If you do not delete that comment in the next 5 minutes, I will file a tortious interference claim. I will contact an attorney and hit you with a defamation suit so fast it will bankrupt you. I take a slow sip of water. I recognize the panic hiding behind his legal threats. He is not defending his parenting. He is defending his asset. Truth is an absolute defense to defamation, Richard. I state, using his first name to sever the familial tie. The document is authentic. I acquired it through a Freedom of Information request. If you sue me, the discovery process will grant my attorney access to your property. We will rip out the drywall behind the water heater. We will bring in our own environmental hygienists. Are you prepared to pay for that litigation? Richard falls silent. He knows he cannot survive a forensic audit of that house. I hang up the phone. While I was speaking with my parents, Chloe launched a counteroffensive online. Desperate to salvage the spotlight leading up to her wedding, Chloe replies directly to my comment on the Facebook post. Her response is designed to garner sympathy. Please ignore my sister, Chloe writes for all the relatives to see. Isabella has struggled with her mental wellness for many years. We have tried to get her help. It breaks my heart that she is doctoring fake documents to ruin my bridal season. Please pray for her healing. I read my sister's smear campaign. A year ago, this public humiliation would have crushed me. I would have called David in tears, seeking comfort. But David is currently staying at his brother's house, a casualty of this exact pursuit of truth. I am alone in my apartment. I rely on the cold comfort of the evidence. I do not engage with Chloe's comment. The screenshot speaks for itself. It contains the official county watermark. It features the dated signature of a registered environmental health specialist. It lists the precise parcel number of the Buffalo property. No rational adult looking at that file could mistake it for a forgery. The tension shifts from a family dispute to a tangible crisis 10 minutes later. Aunt Helen leaves a comment on the thread. Helen is Richard's older sister. She has operated a local real estate brokerage in Erie County for 3 decades. For 15 years, whenever Helen or any other guests came over for Thanksgiving, my parents always kept the basement door deadbolted, claiming it was an unsafe utility space. Helen never saw my bedroom. Helen does not care about wedding drama or family gossip. Helen cares about liability. Richard, Susan, what is this? Helen types. Please tell me this mold was professionally remediate. You accepted an offer on this house last week. You are in active escrow. If you checked the clean disclosure box while knowing about systemic water intrusion and black mold, you are committing seller fraud. You need to call your listing agent right now. The digital landscape freezes. Helen's comment strips away the emotional theater and exposes the raw financial danger. By making the health department report public on a heavily trafficked post filled with local Buffalo residents, I have inadvertently alerted the entire community to the structural decay. The buyers currently in escrow are local. They share mutual friends, with several people commenting on the thread. It is a mathematical certainty that the buyers will see the screenshot before sunset. I watch the screen as my parents' careful facade crumbles. The trap snaps shut. Susan and Richard cannot delete the post fast enough. Even if they remove the entire tribute, the screenshots already exist. The local real estate market operates on whispers and risk avoidance. The escrow process is now fatally compromised. I close my laptop. The silence in my apartment is heavy. I have successfully cornered the people who hurt me. Their social standing is ruined. Their lucrative property sale is trapped behind a wall of legal disclosure requirements. They will be forced to spend tens of thousands of dollars to strip the basement down to the studs before they can ever list the house again. I walk to the window and look out at the street. The victory feels distinctly hollow. I expose the rot in my family's foundation, but I am standing in an empty room, paying the price for my own forensic precision. Susan deleted the post 26 minutes after Aunt Helen submitted her comment. The deletion did not matter. In the digital age, a deletion functions merely as an admission of guilt. The screenshots had already migrated from the public feed to private text threads across Erie County. The buyers under contract were a young couple utilizing a first-time home buyer loan program. They shared mutual acquaintances with my younger sister. By Tuesday morning, their real estate agent contacted Richard and Susan. The buyers demanded an immediate secondary environmental inspection. Richard tried to refuse the request. He cited the previously signed property disclosures and claimed the inspection contingency period had expired. The buyers threatened to terminate the contract and report the seller fraud to the state real estate licensing board. Richard capitulated because he lacked any remaining leverage. The new inspector arrived on Thursday morning. He declined Susan when she offered him fresh coffee and pastries. He carried a digital moisture meter and a thermal imaging camera. He walked straight past the renovated upstairs suite and descended the wooden stairs into the basement. He placed his diagnostic meter against the freshly painted concrete wall directly behind the water heater. The reading spiked immediately. He requested permission to remove a small section of the new drywall. Richard objected loudly, but the buyer's agent reminded him of the pending fraud allegations. The inspector cut a 6-inch square near the baseboard. Behind the pristine white paint, the insulation was saturated and dark. Active toxic mold colonies stretched across the foundational support beams. The inspector packed his equipment and formally advised the buyers to terminate the contract. The sale collapsed by Friday afternoon. The $400,000 exit strategy evaporated into the damp air. Richard and Susan found themselves legally and financially trapped. Once an environmental hazard is professionally documented during an active escrow period, it becomes a mandatory material disclosure for all future listings. They could no longer hide the decay behind cheap primer and staging furniture. In order to sell the property, they would need to hire a certified remediation team. They would have to tear out the basement walls, excavate the surrounding soil, and install industrial drainage systems. The initial contractor estimate exceeded $40,000. My parents did not have $40,000 in liquid assets. They had banked their entire retirement plan on passing their rotting foundation to an unsuspecting young family. Now they were permanently bound to it. The financial ruin was swift and measurable. The social fallout was equally decisive, but it did not favor my pursuit of justice. People often assume that exposing a truth will set you free and rally the community to your side. That assumption is a myth. Exposing a family secret forces the rest of the family to examine their own complicity. My aunts, uncles, and cousins had visited that house in Buffalo for 15 years. They had eaten Thanksgiving turkey in the formal dining room, completely oblivious to the deadbolted door, while I shivered 2 floors below. Acknowledging the validity of the health department report meant acknowledging they had ignored blatant child neglect for a decade. They chose the easier path. They chose to protect the comfortable narrative. The extended family rallied around Chloe and her upcoming wedding. My presence was erased digitally and socially. I watched my name get quietly untagged from years of family vacation albums online. When I tried calling my favorite aunt to explain, the phone just rang endlessly until it hit a sterile, automated voicemail. I had become the vindictive saboteur in their revised history. I was no longer the neglected child. I was just the bitter woman who held a petty grudge and ruined her parents' retirement out of pure spite. They focused entirely on the timing of my screenshot instead of the 45-degree temperature of my childhood bedroom. 10 days after the Facebook post, I walked to my community mailbox. Intermingled with utility bills and grocery circulars was a heavy cream envelope. It contained my original wedding invitation. Someone had drawn a thick black line across my printed name using a permanent marker. A yellow sticky note was attached to the back of the card. It read, "Do not ever contact us again." I sit at my kitchen island and trace the black marker line with my thumb. My apartment is quiet. There is no buzzing group chat requiring my attention. There are no passive-aggressive Sunday phone calls to navigate. The silence is profound, and it carries a specific heavy gravity. I won the war of truth. I forced the municipal record into the light where it could not be ignored. The cost of that victory was the permanent severance of my biological ties. I traded my entire extended family for an undeniable fact. The victory brings no joy. It brings only a sterile clarity. The front door unlocks and David walks inside. He sets his keys on the counter. He has been staying at his brother's house to give us space, but he returns every few days to collect mail and talk. The bridge between us is scorched from the weeks of arguing. We are navigating the ash carefully. He sees the defaced wedding invitation resting on the granite surface. He picks it up and reads the sticky note. He does not offer a hollow platitude or try to fix the situation. He walks to the refrigerator and pours 2 glasses of cold filtered water. He sets one in front of me and sits on the opposite stool. David is a man who values peace above all else, but he is finally beginning to understand the mechanics of my survival. He spent the last 2 weeks watching my parents attempt to defraud a young couple. He watched them prioritize their public image over my physical safety and their legal obligations. He read the vicious messages sent by my sister. He finally sees the load-bearing walls of my childhood for what they truly are. We do not have a tidy resolution yet, but we are finally looking at the same blueprint. The distance between us is shrinking because he recognizes that I was not holding a vendetta. I was holding a shield. I take a slow sip of water. I feel the steady ambient temperature of my apartment. The wall thermostat reads a comfortable 70 degrees. I pay for this heat with money I earned from tracking municipal compliance and citing code violations. I built an independent life that does not require me to shiver or beg for basic warmth. I think about Buffalo. Winter arrives early in western New York. By November, the ground freezes solid, and the damp cold seeps through porous, untreated concrete. Richard and Susan cannot afford to fix the basement. They cannot legally sell the house without disclosing the toxic spores blooming behind the drywall. Their pristine upstairs suite is now tethered to a toxic liability they cannot escape. They wanted to maintain a facade of a warm, perfect, nurturing home. The municipal record denied them that luxury. The unexpected payoff to this forensic pursuit is not a joyful reunion. There is no tearful apology or sudden realization of guilt. There is no redemption arc for people who rewrite history to protect their own fragile egos. The payoff is a cold and satisfying symmetry. I am sitting in a warm, secure home that belongs entirely to me. I am surrounded by quiet truth and a partner who is learning to see me clearly. Meanwhile, my parents are entering the winter season. They are permanently imprisoned in the exact freezing rotting house they once forced me to survive in. They will sit in their living room, listening to the furnace struggle against the draft, and they will breathe the very air they told me was perfectly fine. They built their own trap. I simply handed them the lock. I close my laptop. I drink my water. I enjoy the warmth.